Hey guys, Fizzlezz here, and welcome to the inaugural video in my series I'm going to call Practical Guide to Support. Now, what this series is going to entail is, obviously it's going to include optimal builds, runes, combos, and general tips, but it's also going to include my thought processes behind some of the choices I make in these categories, so that you can take this into other champs perhaps, or create your own builds and rune setups for different situations instead of just following a cookie cutter build guide. So my goal is for you guys to learn more about League in general and how you should be thinking about things as a support player. So since this is the first video in the series, you guys probably have never heard of me if you clicked on this video, so I'm going to give you a brief introduction of my history in League so that I can establish some sort of credibility to any new viewers. So I started playing League in Season 2, so that was 9 years ago, and that was when I was in 8th grade. And back then I played like 30 ranked games because I was too scared of playing ranked. And I ended up basically bronze 1, silver 4 equivalent to today's terms. Then the next season, I ended the season not diamond, plat, by playing MF ADC and Nautilus jungle almost exclusively. And finally, in the next season after that, season 4, I've hit diamond for the first time, and ever since then I've maintained at least a diamond 4 rank for every single season since then. Now, full disclaimer, I've never been masters or higher than that, but I've maintained at least D4, and the caveat I would give is that for most of the time I was a fill main. So nowadays a lot of people complain about getting autofill, but I voluntarily picked Phil because that's how I like playing the game. I like playing different champs, different roles. I like to experience all the types of play styles that you could play. Pretty much like an opposite of a one trick. So if you know anything about queuing Phil, historically it's been mostly support and jungle that are least played roles. Support's a lot better nowadays. It's been buffed a lot, so a lot of people like playing it now because it has a lot more impact. But due to this, I actually became pretty good at support and jungle, and also I played ADC in the past during high school. So there was one year where I was plat in college because I didn't have enough time to play, but then in my senior year of college I decided to finally join the League team and try to pursue some sort of competitive aspect of the game rather than just playing for fun fill ranked. So I applied to the team, but I didn't know what role I wanted to play. So I applied as Phil because they had an option to apply as Phil, and turns out there was no good candidate for support that was Diamond Plus, so they gave me the support position, and ever since then I've been maining support to try to get better at the role, and I've learned a lot since then, and I want to showcase this in a guide video for supports, different support champs, because there isn't a lot of support content in general anywhere. Also, I should mention there is a dog in the background. Do with that what you will. Alright, so let's get to the actual video now. As you see from the title of the video, today we're doing a guide on our boy Nautilus. Now, why did I choose Nautilus for the first champion in this series? Well, he's one of the best supports in, I would say, all elos. No matter what elo you're in, he's going to be an effective support, including challenger and even pro play. He's one of the most highly contested picks. Nautilus will always be a great champion to play no matter what. His kit is just really well suited for support, and that's why you should definitely consider adding him to your champ pool. So start off with the runes. For your keystone, it's gonna be 100% aftershock. Aftershock enables supports who don't have as much income as the rest of the team to be a lot more tankier than they normally would be. So this is just very essential for any melee frontline support who needs to go in and tank a little bit at least. Next, we're gonna look at the first layer of runes. We got Demolish, Font of Life, and Shield Bash. Now, what I would say is for this layer is that all three of these runes are viable. A lot of people, when they start playing off Nautilus, they're recommended to take Shield Bash. And Shield Bash is good, but it is also mediocre in some ways, because all it does is just give you a tiny bit of extra damage, because it's bonus adaptive damage, and you don't have that. You basically have no AP as a support, so it's not actually that much damage. So I would actually recommend not taking Shield Bash. I would take Demolish or Font of Life over Shield Bash, because Font of Life is just a generally good rune for any support to have. Most supports have an impairing movement ability. In fact, probably all supports do. And then when you do this to an enemy, your ADC and your ADC attacks them, they will just heal, and that's just good overall. But finally, now this is a underrated rune by a lot of lower elo players, is Demolish. And the reason why Demolish is so good is because if you can win your lane or get a push in and get a Demolish proc on the turret, that is essentially 160 gold worth of value for you and your ADC. And it doesn't even have to be applied to only bot lane. If you roam mid and get a kill and then push the lane in using your relic shield, you can stay for an extra Demolish proc for your mid lane, or maybe even your top lane. And this is just it just generates a lot of gold, whereas before as a support you would do no damage to a turret. This actually helps you kill turrets. So if you know you can win lane or get some roams off, definitely take Demolish. Otherwise, if you're just starting out and learning Nautilus and you want to be a bit safer, just take Font of Life. It will always give you some sort of value. For the next layer, we have Conditioning, Second Wind, and Bone Plating. Now for this layer, I would say don't take Conditioning. The reason why is because Conditioning only activates after 12 minutes, which is the opposite of what we want for support. As a support player, most of your strength is going to be early game, where everyone doesn't have items, so you're on an even playing field, but you have a lot of CC in your kit. But Conditioning has the effect only after 12 minutes, and also increases your armor magic resist by a percentage amount, which you won't have that much compared to, say, an Ornn top laner who is stacking Ornn items and a lot of tank items. You'll probably only have a locket, so you won't get as much value as he would from a Conditioning rune. So I would say don't take Conditioning. Then for Second Wind, it's a viable rune choice. I actually like taking Second Wind against poke lanes, especially, for example, like Brand or Xerath. You're not always going to be able to engage on them. Normally, you would think, oh, I'll just hook him and then he won't be able to poke me. Well, sometimes that won't be the case. Sometimes they'll have a minion wave and they'll be standing behind it, and it'll be very hard to hook them, and they're going to poke you down from long range. So taking Second Wind will help counteract that poke just a little bit. Whereas if you took Bone Plating, Bone Plating doesn't actually stop any poke damage, because the first time you get hit, you don't block anything. It's the only 3 spells or attacks afterward where you get reduced damage. So Bone Plating is better for all-in situations, such as if you're playing a melee versus melee matchup. Then both of you are going to take a lot of attacks from the ADC when you go in, so Bone Plating will get full value. Whereas if you're against like a poke support slash lane, like Ezreal, Varus, and then poke supports would be like Karma, any mage support. Second wind will definitely stop the poke, whereas if you take bone plate against them, it wouldn't actually prevent any of the poke damage. So make sure you taking into account what lane you're playing against when you're considering which one to take. But generally speaking, bone plating is really strong. Finally, we have the last layer in the resolve tree. Also for the resolve tree, you should the reason I'm going so in depth into it is because a lot of basically all melee supports will be taking the resolve tree because it is the strongest defensively. So if you know what all these do really well and what situations you can take them in, you won't need to watch a guide anymore. You'll just be able to know by yourself which runes to take. For the third layer, we have Overgrowth, Revitalize, and Unflinching. So starting off with Overgrowth, it's not actually going to give you that much extra health because you're going to be roaming a lot. So you're going to be under leveled compared to the rest of the team. Whereas if a top laner took this, for example, they would be farming a lot of minions and getting more value. Whereas you're going to be roaming away from your ADC and not be able to get value from this. So I would not recommend taking Overgrowth. Revitalize is a viable rune for enchanters mainly, so not melee supports. This does work on Nautilus's W, but it's not worth it because you're trying to protect your team as a support, not protect yourself in most situations. Finally, you have Unflinching. Unflinching in general is just a really strong rune. It provides just a bit more tenacity than you would normally have, and it can be really clutch when you're a melee engaged support and you're flashing in and hooking someone and someone else CCs you and you're gonna die because of that. You can actually maybe get away due to Unflinching. For the third layer, I would definitely recommend taking Unflinching. It's basically the only viable rune, but it's also very strong. Finally, let's go to the secondary tree. So for the secondary tree, we have Inspiration. So I'm going to give a detailed rundown of the Inspiration tree just so that you guys can understand which runes to take in which situations, because all these runes are, you know, decent in their own right in different situations. But if you just want a quick rundown of which runes you take, I would definitely recommend Hexflash, Biscuit Delivery, and Cosmic Insight. So just pick 2 out of those 3 if you don't want to actually listen to my in-depth analysis of the runes, but yeah, 2 of those 3 are always going to be good. So let's start off with the first row. We got Hexflash. Now, what's so good about Hexflash? Well, as a melee engage support, your flash is your biggest cooldown that you're looking at. With your flash, you're gained extra like free range on all your engage abilities. So it's really important that you utilize flash as often as possible. And what Hexflash does is that it literally allows you to use your flash every 20 seconds pretty much, with the drawback that you have to channel it. So why is this good on melee engage supports? Well, now you can threaten your range of a flash hook, for example, even if you had just flashed and don't have it up anymore. So what you can do is stand in a bush, and since they don't have vision on you, you could be channeling Hexflash or you could not be, but they have to respect it, because if they don't, they're gonna die after you flash out of the bush and hook them. So that's why Hexflash is so strong. What I would say about this is that a lot of beginners have a lot of trouble using Hexflash because it's very clunky to use, but if you can master it, it will greatly affect your gameplay and help you carry games. Next, we'll have Magical Footwear. So this kind of goes back to conditioning, where Magical Footwear only activates after 12 minutes, but by then you already wanted to have boots and be running it down in other lanes to try to get roams off. In fact, magical footwear is worse than conditioning because it actually prevents you from buying boots before then. So you're actually handicapping yourself in the early game for just to save 300 gold, which as support is a lot of gold, but it's worth to spend all your gold early game on movement speed because that's the biggest thing that you could use to roam more and help your team out more. Next, we got perfect timing. Now, this used to be a really strong rune because you would get it like at like 6 minutes on average or something. But now they really nerfed it by a lot. So you need a lot of takedowns to even get it down to a reasonable time. And it is a free 650 gold, but it's usually not worth it because of how long it takes to get it up. But you can take this rune if you really want to have a free stopwatch. Also, Nautilus can build Zhonya's, so if you're 100% gonna build Zhonya's, you should definitely take this rune. But Zhonya's is a bit off meta, and it's better in high level play where Zhonya's can be a game-changing effect, whereas in low elo, your team might not capitalize on your Zhonya's properly. Next, we'll have Futures Market. This is not good on any support because it costs gold to go into debt. It costs 50 gold to go into debt. So you're not going to have enough income to support that, and you're not going to be able to utilize the power spikes that Futures Market gives you. The only power spikes supports really have is their locket purchase, because it's such a large, because it gives such a nice active for your team, but it's not really worth having Futures Market just to get that power spike. Next, we have Minion Dematerializer. So this is actually a pretty strong rune. So you can use this in conjunction with your Relic Shield to instantly kill any minion from full HP and share the gold because you have Relic Shield. Because of this, you can use it on a cannon and have a large push against the opponent. Whereas before, you would have to auto that cannon down to half HP and then kill it. And then by that time, the enemy team will either be autoing you and not allowing you to do that, or they'll be pushing back in their own way. So the push would be even. But with Minion Dematerializer, you could quickly push the lane and then start roaming. So I would say this is a very high level of rune choice. I wouldn't recommend this for beginners. But if you do want to experiment with it, feel free to, because it is a strong rune if you can use it properly. Next, we have the Biscuit Delivery. Now, Biscuits is just a really strong rune in pretty much all situations. It gives you just free potions in lane for sustain, including a mana potion, which doesn't exist anymore. So it also increases your max mana every time you use or sell a biscuit. So what this does is that as a support, you will actually have a small mana pool because you're under leveled compared to the rest of the team, and you won't be buying too many mana items. The only mana item you'll buy is a locket. I mean, not locket. Zeke's Convergence, but that's way down the line because you won't have enough income to buy that until maybe like 30 minutes in. And by that time, you would already have needed the extra mana for 30 minutes. So this is a really strong rune in general, just for lane sustain and giving you max mana. So for Biscuit Delivery, what I would say on this rune is that it's a really strong rune in all situations pretty much. It basically just gives you free sustain in lane and also increases your max mana every time you consume or sell it. Now, before you could sell this for 30 gold, now you can only sell for 5 gold, so selling it really isn't worth it. You should always try to use it. But overall, it just free sustain. So it's good in poke lanes, it's good in melee matchups where you're fighting to death and you pop this biscuit when you're low health and you gain a lot of health back, and perhaps you swing the fight due to that. So biscuits are pretty much always go-to take for supports and Nautilus in general. Next, we'll have Cosmic Insight. So Cosmic Insight just gives you free Summoner Spell Haste and Item Haste, which is really strong for any support in general because we build a lot of items. Mainly Locket is the primary item that you're going to be getting, but also for enchanters you'll be getting Shirelias and stuff like that. So they all have item cooldowns, and the item haste is really nice. Summoner Spell Haste is also really good. It just reduces your flash and ignite exhaust cooldowns, and that's just really good for support. As I said before, flash is a really important cooldown for any melee gauge support, but also anyone in general. Everyone knows flash is really strong, so having this is just good overall for that. So now we have Approach Velocity. This really isn't a good rune for Nautilus because he doesn't have a long range slow ability that he could utilize this from. He just needs to hook them, and he's already in range to do everything that he needs. So don't take Approach Velocity on Nautilus. Finally, a Time Warp Tonic. This basically makes your potions and biscuits give you an instant health rather than health over time, and you gain a little bit of movement speed while under the effects. So this is more used for in 1v1 lanes where sustain matters a lot more, because if your opponent, for example in the mid lane, brings you down to like 100 HP and they're like 400 HP, well, you're in the threat of dying at any point now, and you need a base. But if you base, you're gonna lose that entire wave, whereas a support can just base most of the time and get away with it because they don't need a CS. As long as your ADC is getting the minions, it's not really that big of a loss. So I would say for Time Warp Tonic, don't take this as well for supports. So at the end of the day, what runes should you be taking in the inspiration tree? Well, I would say take Hexflash and Biscuits as your primary rune setup. Now, why is this? Well, because Hexflash, as I said before, is really strong on all melee supports because of the fact you can threaten engages from farther range than before, and also an added bonus is that you can jump over walls that you could previously only do when your flash is up. Next, Biscuit Delivery is just a strong rune in general, so I would always take this. And then, but if you're just a beginner and don't really understand Hexflash, consider just taking Biscuits and Cosmic Insight. They're both just free stat boosts, and they're really nice to have. Finally, we have these stat runes. I don't actually know what they're called, but for the first one, we have the offense one, I guess it's called. So for the offense one, you should probably be taking Ability Haste. There's a specific rune in general for Nautilus only, which is the attack speed rune. The reason why you would take this is because you have a root on your auto attack, and your auto attack is affected by attack speed, so you'll be able to land your root more consistently with the attack speed rune. And I would actually take this almost 100% of the time against Yuumi specifically. I find this really helpful against Yuumi, where she's trying to get off and auto you for her passive. You could just auto her really fast, faster than she expects with this attack speed rune. Or if she just gets off in general and you need to auto her as fast as possible, like flash auto attack, this makes your auto attack way faster and more easily allows you to root the enemy. So in general, the ability haste rune is also just really strong. It's just free ability haste, which is really strong for any support. Next, we have the flex rune and the defense rune, and these are pretty much go hand in hand. If you're against heavy AD, just take 2 armor. If you're against like some sort of mage bot, like double mage bot maybe, like Zig Zerath, like some weird stuff, just switch both of these to magic resist and you'll be a lot happier. But if you're against like a Zerath and a Varus, for example, then you should probably take half and half, because they're both going to be doing a lot of damage to you in lane. So taking half and half is just the middle ground, the nice middle ground. So that's it for the runes. Let's go into some of his abilities. Alright guys, so let's first talk about his build path, since it's pretty easy. So for the starting item, you pretty much always want to go Relic Shield start. The reason why is because all 4 of Nautilus's abilities scale with AP. So the AP item is slightly better for him than the AD item. But the AD item is also viable because he does auto attack a decent amount. So if you're against a lane where you know you're going to be auto attacking a lot, for example, like a melee matchup, you could consider going Steel Shield Guards, but I would just recommend going Relic Shield. Next, for the first item you're going to get, it's pretty much always going to be a Locket of the Iron Solari. The reason why is because Locket has a really strong active that shields your team and yourself, and also grants them bonus resistances just for free. And the resistances it gives you are the stats that it gives you are really nice for supports specifically, because it gives you health, ability haste, armor, and magic resist, and those are the 4 things that you pretty much want, besides movement speed. So pretty much you're only going Locket. The other items are pretty much for enchanters. Some newer players tend to get these Sunfire items on support, but the Sunfire items aren't actually good on support because 1, they're more expensive than Locket, so you're gonna get them later, and 2nd, you're not really looking to do damage as a support or clear waves, and that's the main reason why top laners and other tank junglers get this, so that they can kill either the jungle camps or the lane minions faster. Whereas on support, you're not actually looking to kill the minions, or do damage to the enemies. So that's why I wouldn't recommend getting a Sunfire item on support Nautilus. You used to could go Turbo Chem Tank, but they nerfed it, so it's not as strong anymore. And Nautilus doesn't really need this anyway, so yeah, don't go Turbo Chem Tank either. Just get a Locket. Your team will thank you for that. Next, for what are you gonna get after you get your mythic? So for legendary items, all these items are pretty much viable. I would say the main ones you want to look for are the ones 2700 or less, because these more expensive items are pretty much unattainable for supports during the course of a game. So I'm just going to go over these briefly. For Knight's Vow, it allows you to redirect damage that your ADC takes to you, which is a good thing in general because your ADC's HP is worth more than your HP. So a big concept in this game is the value of people's health and how you can maximize using health value. So in a team fight, you actually want to lose all your health, but still live with like as little health as possible, because that means you've soaked the most amount of damage possible without dying. And your HP is less valuable than your ADC's HP, because if your ADC dies in a late game team fight, you auto lose the fight no matter what you do. Whereas if you die, but the ADC is able to keep dealing damage out, you might be able to win that fight. So Knight's Vow is just a strong item in general. Next we have Zeke's Convergence, also a very strong item, but it's more an offensive item. So after you immobilize an enemy, your accomplices, the person you bind this to, will do more damage. And so it's more of a damage oriented support item, but if you are snowballing ahead and don't really think you need Knight's Vow, consider going Zeke's Convergence, because it's a really strong item, increasing your team's damage. Next, Frozen Heart and Randuin's are kind of the same. Frozen Heart is better if you have a lot of attack speed champs on the enemy team. For example, they have Master Yi, Jax, and ADC, and maybe something else. Like even Gwen is good against Gwen, even though she's an AP champ, because she also attacks a lot. So that's when you would buy Frozen Heart. Then for Randuin's, Randuin's is better against crit. So if they have a lot of crit champs, for example, if they have a mid crit Lucian and a regular ADC crit bot, then Randuin's would be really strong because you're affecting 2 people at once. Anathema's Chains is a new item. I don't really understand when to build this right now, but It does give you a lot of HP and nice ability haste, and also it reduces tenacity on anyone you target. So for example, if they have a really high priority target that you need to CC, you can consider building Anathema's chains, basically ensuring that they get locked down. Finally, the last two items are Thornmail and Abyssal Mask. So for Thornmail is a really strong item in general, especially if they have a lot of healing, because it applies 60% grievous wounds just from immobilizing them. So you're basically, if you ult someone or if you hook someone, they're gonna have 60% grievous wounds on them for 3 seconds. So if they have a lot of healing, for example, Vlad, Yuumi, Aatrox, these champs, you should definitely consider going Thornmail's second item. And finally, Abyssal Mask. Abyssal Mask is more for if they have a heavy magic damage team and you want to deal more damage for your team. It's actually a pretty underrated item because it just increases the damage on a CC target for so much, and you can just basically one-shot them if you ever get a nice hook off. So Abyssal Mask you should build if they have a bit more magic damage, and or you want to just one-shot someone. So that's what I say about the items. For support in general, you're probably only going to hit 2 items at most, and that's why selecting one of these is selecting the right one is really beneficial. But also at that point it's up to your team to be doing damage and not you. So finally, you should also consider buying the Watchful Wardstone when you're about to hit level 13. This item is pretty much everything you want as a support. You get to increase your control wards, and once you upgrade it, you'll be able to also place more stealth wards and control wards as well by 1. And it just gives you a flat stat increase to all your stats, which is really powerful for 1100 gold. But only supports can buy this item because you need to have a support quest completed. So if you're about to hit level 13 consider saving up 1100 gold to buy this instead of going for your next item. In fact, you should probably always be buying this if you're hitting level 13. The hardest thing about this is that you have to think about it to save 1100 gold and then buy it. So I forgot to mention what boots you should be getting. Basically, the viable boots are for Nautilus are Mercury Treads, Plated Steel Caps, Boots of Swiftness, and Mobility Boots. So you should get Mercury Treads when they have either a lot of magic damage and or a lot of CC. It's pretty self-explanatory. It just gives you tenacity. This is especially good against Leona, who's really weak against Merc Treads because she can't fully CC stun you, CC lock you with her full combo if you have Merc Treads. You'll be able to flash out of her Q before she gets her R channel off if you have Merc Treads. So definitely buy Merc Treads pretty much regardless against Leona, unless they're like pretty much full AD. Next, Plated Steel Caps. This is just the AD counterpart of Merc Treads. If they have a lot of AD, definitely build this over Merc Treads, and especially if they don't have that much CC. Next, we have Mobility Boots. This basically allows you to roam a lot faster than you normally would, but in combat, you're going to be the same movement speed as regular boots. So it's a very high risk, high reward sort of boot. I wouldn't actually recommend this for new players because it's really punishing if you get caught out, and you also aren't as good as at roaming, so you won't get as much value out of it. Now, boot I actually like the most is the Boots of Swiftness. It just gives you a flat 60 move speed no matter what the situation is, and it also has a bonus of just reducing all slows. So while it doesn't have full tenacity like Merc Treads, which applies on all hard CC, it only affects on slows, but it also gives you a ton of move speed. So basically, it's a nice middle ground for all the boots. It gives you a ton of move speed, like Mobility Boots. Not as much, but it always applies, and also it just gives you a little bit tenacity for slowing effects in general. And it's also the cheapest boot. So if you have 900 gold, just buy this and you'll be really happy. I wouldn't buy Ionian Boots of Lucidity on Nautilus because his cooldowns are pretty low already, and you don't really need to have more ability haste. Whereas you definitely need some of the more movement speed or tankier boots, because Nautilus himself is pretty squishy. The only thing he has going for him is a small shield on his W, whereas Leona has like a huge damage reduction on her W. Alistar has a flat damage reduction on his ult. Braum has a big shield. You know, all these other supports actually have like an innate tankiness to them, but Nautilus only has a shield, so he's actually a lot squishier than most people think. And also his base HP is quite low for a champion in general. All right, guys, now let's take a look at some of his abilities and some basic combos. So first off, his passive is Staggering Blow. Basically, whenever you auto attack someone, it's gonna root them for a little bit. And if you, as you can see, this little circle appears around a target. As that circle is still there, you can't root them again until the circle has fully dissipated. And you can tell this by the circle, but also his auto attack animation changes. So as you can see, it's hitting with a little bit less oomph, as I like to call it. But when he roots, he always slams his anchor down like that. So now we have his Q ability, his signature hook called Dredge Line. Basically, this hook is not a complete hook like Blitzcrank's hook, where he hooks targets straight towards him, but instead they meet about in the middle. So to demonstrate this, we're just going to hook him, and as you can see, Nautilus is also pulled towards the target, which is pulled a little bit towards him. And this is at all ranges, so even then it's about 2/3, I would say. But if you're like right next to someone, it's pretty much like halfway. So it like depends on the distance, but as you play Nautilus, you'll be able to determine exactly how far you're going to be hooking them back and how far you're going to be pulling yourself forward. So his W is called Titan's Wrath. When you activate it, you get a shield, and your auto attacks do an AoE dot damage. So as you can see there's two 15s. So there's two procs of the dot damage that happens. The main thing that you need to know about his W is that it is an auto attack reset. So what this means is that you can cancel your auto attack animation with the W animation, which allows you to do two auto attacks a bit faster than you normally would be able to. So this is just two normal W auto attacks. So I activate W, auto attack him twice, and that's the DPS. It was 167 before my aftershock hit him. But if I do the auto attack cancel, the DPS is now 304. So it basically, your DPS is a lot faster with this auto attack cancel. And you can also use it to clear wards a bit faster than you normally would be able to, which is also helpful. So make sure, if you're ever going to be trying to maximize DPS, which is actually really important as a support in the early game, much more important than people give it credit for, you always want to be doing the auto attack animation cancel with your W. Next is his E, Riptide. Nautilus basically sends out 3 waves of water, and each of these waves will be slowing and doing damage. It's just a nice overall ability that you can use in a lot of situations. If you're running away, you can E, and as they're chasing you, they get slowed. But if you're going in, you can also E them, and they'll also be slowed from running away from you. Finally, we have his ultimate, Depth Charge. So what this ability does is a point and click ability. You basically click on an enemy, and he will get knocked up after this projectile travels towards him. Now the thing about this is that it has a knock up in a radius around the target, so both of these will get knocked up if they're standing too close to each other, but this one won't because it's far away enough. But also the projectile that comes out hits everyone that it touches. So now if I'm standing over here, when I line them up, it will hit all 3 of these targets. So how can you use this ability effectively? Well, as I demonstrated before, lining up your targets is better than not lining them up. So now I can ult all 3 of them, whereas if I was standing over here, I can only ult 1 of them. So for this ability, if your opponents are ever standing in a line like this, ult the guy in the back, if you can target him at least. If he's out of range, for example, here, you can just ult this guy who's behind this guy. But if you're here, you might as well ult this guy instead of one of these two, because even though if you ult one of these two, it's going to hit both of these. If you ult this guy, it's going to hit 3 people, and that's just maximizing your abilities and how much utility they can do. So that's it for his basic abilities. I'm going to go over some of more niche things and his combos. So let's go over some of his Q interactions. So for his Q, he can also hook terrain, and he will pull himself towards the terrain. And this also reduces the ability cooldown by 50%, and 50% of the mana cost is refunded. So what this means is that if you're spawning in base, for example, you can hook the walls to get the lane faster. Or you can also hook the turrets, the inhib, anything that is terrain you can hit. And this also applies to when you're roaming mid. You could hook these walls to get mid faster, and then perhaps surprise the enemy, or be faster than the enemy support is to roaming mid. So as a Nautilus player, you should always be using your hook when you're coming back out of base to get to lane faster. So Nautilus hook actually has a interesting property that is found in a lot of skill shots in League, but basically it's called a lollipop effect, where at the end is ability right here, the hitbox is actually like a big circle, whereas as it's traveling it's just a line, but at the end it blooms into like a circle, kind of like a big lollipop. So that's why it's called that. So the lollipop effect on his Q actually affects champs and terrain differently. So let's test this out by showing you how far I could hook a champ away from versus a turret. So I'm going to stand far back and then keep walking slowly forward until I could hook this target, and then see where I am. So I was about in line with this flower right here, about there. And now I'm going to try the same place on the turret. So yeah, I had to walk like 2 more steps around here to be able to hook the turret. Whereas if an enemy champion was replacing this turret, I would be all the way back here and I would be able to hook him. So like, as you can see, Nautilus' hook is quite long because of this lollipop effect. So why do you want to hook the wall as a Nautilus? Well, there's a couple reasons why. The first reason is you want to get the lane faster, as I stated previously. The second reason is if you're running away from a gank perhaps, or you're low HP, you can hook the wall to get away as a sort of movement ability, because Nautilus doesn't have any movement abilities innately, but if he hooks terrain, it's essentially a movement ability. Third reason is you could hook the wall behind an enemy champion on purpose just to close the gap. And say for example they juke your hook or you miss. If you aim for the wall, you're still going to get in range to root them and maybe ult them. So that's like a third, like really advanced technique that you can use. But most of the time you just want to be aiming your hook at the enemy champion if you can. So the thing about running away with your hook is that sometimes you overestimate how far your hook actually goes when trying to hit terrain. Whereas normally if a champion here, you'd be like, okay, yeah, I can definitely hit him from here. But the wall is a different story, because the wall doesn't actually have the lollipop effect on it. So now you have to aim a bit closer than you usually would. So that's what you should take note for that. Next, for his W, the main thing about this is that you need to use the auto attack reset. And then for his E, the cool thing about his E is that you can use it while hooking someone. So, and this also includes terrain. So if you're running away, the main use for this is that if you're running away, you can hook the wall, and as your hook is traveling, you can E, and then it will slow everyone who's chasing you, but you'll also be able to hook away to safety. This also applies when you're hooking an enemy dummy. So you can hook, and as you're hooking, you press E, and then the E will automatically damage him and slow him before you have to wait. Whereas before, if you did the opposite, if you E'd first and then hooked, it's much slower. Because when you E, you have to stop moving. Whereas when you're hook E'ing, you're immediately canceling that stoppage by your pull. So the same thing applies to when you're hitting an enemy champ. Normally it'll look like, if I do the animation cancel with my E, it's gonna look like that. But if I do this, it's much slower. So that's pretty much all the interactions we have with Nautilus and his abilities. So what is the maximum amount? What is his bread and butter combo? Well, without ultimate, it's basically just Q, auto attack, reset, E. That allows you to 1, stun the enemy with your hook, 2, get the root off so now they still can't move, auto attack reset for increased damage, and then E at the end so they're slowed when they're running away. That's basically the maximum amount of CC without your ult. If you know the enemy has a dash and they're going to be able to get away from you, a better combo would be QE as you're queuing, as we just talked about, and then just immediately W root him. So then you're getting as much damage as you can before they dash away. For example, Lucian, he's going to dash away as soon as he's able to. You might not be able to do the combo where you have to auto attack reset and then E. He will be able to get away from you at that point. So you want to do the QE and then just W auto attack, or QE and then do the auto attack reset at the bare minimum. So finally, let's add his ult into the mix. So as a Nautilus player, you want to be able to master what's called CC chaining. Basically means is you layer your CC so that their durations don't overlap as much as possible. So what do I mean by this? Well, if you ult someone and then immediately hook, you're overlapping your hook stun and the knockup with each other. So they're not actually ticking at different times. Whereas if you ult them, wait for the knockup to end, and then hook, you're basically CCing them for twice the duration that compared to the previous combo. So as Nautilus, you always want to wait for them to get knocked up and then hook, because of CC chaining. And also it just guarantees your hook able to land, because once they're knocked up, they're a stationary target and you won't be able to miss. Whereas as this is traveling, they can still flash, they can still dash, they can still juke. So it's not as reliable. As for the maximum CC chain you can do on Nautilus by yourself, since he has so many, so Nautilus is unique in the fact that he has so many CCs built into his kit that he can actually CC chain with himself. Normally CC chaining is a team. So Nautilus is really unique in the fact that he can actually CC chain with himself because he has so many hard CC abilities. Normally CC chaining is only applicable to teams because most champs only have like one hard CC ability, and so you want to chain it with your team rather than overlapping. But since Nautilus has so many on his own kit, you can affect your own CC chains and get the optimal CC every single time. So the maximum CC combo is going to look like this: R, wait for the knock up to end, and then do the rest of your combo that we talked before. And same thing applies if they have a dash. So if they have a dash, you can QE and just auto them rather than wait for the E at the end. Now say you're in a situation where you got your hook first before ulting. What is the max CC combo then? Well, then you should Q and then immediately R. You can either Q, auto, and then R, or you can Q, R, and then auto, and it's the same, pretty much the same premise. Normally, you would do the QR only if you're really scared that they're gonna get away. for example, if they have a lot of tenacity, if they have merc treads, they're much more, their stun on your Q is going to be much less than it normally would. Whereas they can't, tenacity doesn't work on knockups, so that's when you would Q and then R immediately to guarantee that they're CC'd. But if they don't have a lot of tenacity, you can just Q auto and then R right afterward. And then preferably if you Q someone like that and then auto them, and if there's someone behind them like this, you want to ult that guy instead, because now you're going to get 2 people for the price of 1. So finally, let's talk about his interactions with Flash. So a lot of you might not know, but so finally let's talk about his interactions with Flash. So some people you might not know, but so finally let's talk about his interactions with Flash. So a lot of you might not know that you can actually use an ability and then flash afterward rather than flashing first and then using ability. And this makes your combo a lot faster and harder to react to. So what do I mean by this? Well, Nautilus can do this with his E and his R. So if I would normally flash E, that's what it looked like. But if I press E first and then flash, it's a bit faster because my E is already channeling as I'm flashing. But as you can see, the E doesn't come out over here. It comes out where I land. So that's why E flashing works. Now he can't do this with his hook, because if he could do that, it would be really broken. None of the hook champs can do this. So if I do a Q flash, that's what's gonna look like. I'm just gonna Q first, and then afterward it's gonna buffer my flash, and I'm just gonna flash like an idiot. So you can only flash hook. That's the fastest you could do it. But you can also flash R or R flash. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's look. So if I flash R like this, that's how fast it looks. But if I R first and then flash, by the time I'm flash, he's already knocked up. And the reason why this works is because as this projectile comes up, it travels to where Nautilus is. Well, it starts where Nautilus is, just like his E. So when you flash, it's going to start over here rather than here, and it's going to be much faster. And you can also use this in really creative ways. For example, you're only in range to hit this guy, but if you flash over here, this guy's going to get knocked up immediately even though you targeted him, and this guy is still going to get knocked up at the very end anyway. So this could also be used in really funky ways like this, where it just takes a really long time for the projectile to get there. But I mean, you would never do that in game, but that's just demonstrate how it works. So even though these guys are like super far apart and there's no way you can hit both of them with your ult, if you ult this guy and then flash like this, he's gonna get hit and he's gonna get hit. Okay, so finally let's talk about Hexflash interactions. So let me just flash here to get Hexflash. So now you'll see that in 20 seconds I'll be able to channel Hexflash. Okay, so now I have Hexflash available, and I'll demonstrate you how you should be using it. So first off, you normally don't want to be Hexflashing in the open like this. Why? Because your opponent can easily react and just back off or cancel it with some ability. You need to fully channel it for it to work, so any CC ability will stop it. So what you should be doing is standing in a bush that's unwarded. So you might want to use a red trinket first or a control ward to make sure that it's not warded. But now that you're in a bush, they can't see you channeling it. So now you can pop out and then hook immediately or something like that, or ult. And so if they don't give you respect and back off, they're just gonna die and get hooked. But if they do back off, you just zone them off, which is also a good thing. And it's even better if they don't know you're in the bush. So if they don't know they're in the bush, they're not gonna play around you like that. If you can sneak into a bush like this and then hex flash out and then hook, bam, now you've gotten a guy all the way back here from here. Whereas before you could only get him like here if you're standing here. So a good way to use this is, say you come mid, you stand in this bush, make sure it's swept, and you channel Hexflash, and the enemy mid laner is like right here, for example. And now you're in range to hook him, whereas before you have to walk out slowly, and then he would see you, and then he would just be able to react accordingly. But now you can hex flash out of the bush without even using your flash cooldown. Like say you burn your flash in a fight bot, but now you still be able to threaten this much range on him. And it's pretty hard to react to because it's pretty much a flash. Thing is, another thing you can use this ability for is just to get over walls that you normally wouldn't be able to without flash. So now, for example, I want to go over here and maybe surprise him off this side. I can channel Hexflash, and even though it looks like it's only reaching here, it's going to send you, you can't spawn in the wall, so it's going to send you to the closest area outside of the wall, which is on this side. And now I'm going to come over here and surprise him from over here where he wouldn't expect me from. So there are any of these walls that you can flash over, you can do this with Hexflash. So you can even come back to the dragon pit like this, flash over it, and then hit this blast cone back over it to stop this enemy blast cone. So there's a ton of uses for Hexflash in general. I would recommend playing a lot of games with Hexflash and testing out what you can't do and how best for each situation you should do it. And this is also a common spot just to show. So even though it looks like I'm going into the wall, I'm still going to be flashing over. And make sure you hold down the F key or whatever key it's on. And then at the end, it will just simply, if you let go before, it will go like the shorter distance. But if you just wait until the end, it will do its max distance. So just to show that for a second, if I just wait for 1 second, okay, first of all, it just doesn't even channel if I do it for 1 second. So you gotta hold it for at least a little bit for it to channel. So you can't like quickly do like a mini flash. But if you wait until after it reaches the circle, after the inner circle comes out, you can start canceling it anytime then. And then flash at that distance. But normally you want to stand in a bush and wait for the max distance. Finally, for the other summoner spell, you should be taking Ignite pretty much all the time. Nautilus is a great all-in champ, and having Ignite to reduce heal and also do a lot of true damage is perfect for pretty much all the melee engaged supports. You could take Exhaust if they have a heavy dive comp and you really want to protect your ADC, and your lane isn't gonna be that many kill opportunities, and you just want to play for their team fight. You can also take Exhaust. So let's go into some tips for early laning for Nautilus. First of all, you want to know your power level of your champ at each corresponding level, especially in the early game. So for Nautilus, at level 1, he's quite weak. The only situation where he's strong at is if he can hook the enemy ADC. But if you hook the enemy ADC at level 1, you basically want to hook them, auto them once, and just immediately run away, because you have nothing else to follow after that. If you stay and auto attack him for like 70 damage, like that's not going to do that much. So early game, especially level 1, you want to level up hook most of the time because it's really useful for invades level 1. You can also learn W level 1 if you're going into, say, a melee matchup where hooking like an enemy Leona, well, you know you're not going to hook the enemy ADC, but like hooking the enemy support that's like a Leona or an Alistar is not really going to do anything either. You could consider leveling W first so that you get a nice trade with the shield that it gives you. So for level 2, Nautilus is pretty strong, especially if you get the early level 2. He has a lot of all-in potential with his W Q at level 2. And he's definitely going to win a trade if you get a nice hook off due to his W shield. So Nautilus at level 2 is definitely pretty strong because of his W shield allows him to create favorable trades for himself. At level 3, he's going to learn his E,
and that's just going to add a little bit more well-roundedness and more damage to his overall combos. He's not especially much stronger at 3, but he's also, you know, just gets another ability, which is nice. And then finally at 6 is where Nautilus hits like a really strong power spike. Because his ult is so strong and easy to use, you basically just ult the ADC and then you're gonna get guaranteed CC on him no matter what he does. Unless there's Xayah, because Xayah can dodge, Xayah is the only ADC that can dodge his R with her R. But aside from that situation, level 6 for Nautilus is one of his largest power spikes. So make sure you utilize his level 6 power spike accordingly. So to recap, as Nautilus, for trading, you want to basically just use all your abilities on a target and then run away. Because after that, you'll have no abilities and you'll pretty much be useless. On the other hand, if you're trying to all in them, then you should be kiting forward and keep chasing them and tanking for your ADC as your ADC hits them while they're hitting you, but you're winning the fight. And then once you get low, then you can back off. And then finally at 6, you want to be looking to see if you can catch the ADC with your ult. Maybe stand in a bush and Hexflash out, or maybe just flash R them when their jungler is about to gank and set up a nice gank. Nautilus is really good at setting up ganks for his jungler because he has so much CC, and his R is just literally just a free CC on any target that he wants.
So as you can see, I'm wearing a different shirt now because in post I realized I forgot to include this technique that Nautilus has, but basically it's a really advanced technique that not many people know about, but is really cool if you can actually get it off in a game and do it successfully. So what is the ability? Well, basically, we saw this recently in a LCS game where I forgot who, I think it was Diamond. He used this technique when he auto the scuttle crab, and then you Q afterwards, so it looks like you're just autoing the scuttle crab, but in reality you're faking out your enemy by using an auto tech animation where your Q is actually coming out and about to hook them. So if I just demonstrate this by spawning 2 dummies here, wait for the scuttle crab to get away, but basically I'm gonna Q at the tail end of my root animation so that it looks like I'm rooting, where in actuality my Q is already coming out and about to hit them. So alright, that was not it because my root actually went through. Let's try it again. So that one was too early. So this is actually like not easy to do at all. But if you can do it in game, it will be really really poggers. So as you can see here, that's where I got it. As you can see here, it looked like I was about to auto him, but I was actually queuing already. I can also do this as a scuttle. Like that. It kind of looks funky, but that's what you're kind of doing with this. It's to throw your opponent off. See, normally Nautilus is facing that way. When he's queuing anyone, he turns to wherever he's queuing. But with this, he's facing this enemy, so it's less predictable where you're hooking. And that's it for that. Also in the video, I forgot to mention the skill order, but it's pretty easy to find the skill order anywhere online. But you want to max Q first, and then W is always second because it lets you get tankier. And the E damage and slow isn't that good anymore because they nerfed it a bunch of times. And obviously you level your ult whenever you can. All right, finally at the end of this video, I want to take a look at some matchups because this is a really hard thing to learn because you just need to play a ton of games and you might not necessarily know all the little champion interactions. So I want to give as much information as I possibly can. So right now I'm on op.gg. It's a really nice site that allows you to find builds, runes, and even counters, like these matchup charts that they have. So the top 3 champs he has the lowest win rate against is Rell, Leona, and Braum. I would say all 3 of these matchups are pretty bad for Nautilus. Rell is just tankier than Nautilus pretty much, and also has the same, if not more, CC than he does, because her CC is all AoE, whereas his is mainly single target. So Rell is stronger than him in a lot of cases, and also his Q can break his W, which is just a nice
bonus interaction. Leona is also straight up tankier than Nautilus in the early game because of her W is just so broken and gives her so much defense compared to Nautilus's W, which only gives them a small like 100 HP shield. So basically Leona can always fight Nautilus early and she'll be winning every single time, which is why Nautilus has a lower win rate against Leona. There is a small interaction between Nautilus and Leona where Nautilus can Q Leona as she's Eing, and that'll basically stun her long enough so that she can't get her Q off on him or the ADC, and then that causes her to not be able to engage on Nautilus. But that's a really small thing and really hard to learn as a new player, so just consider not picking Nautilus into Leona if you can. And finally, Braum is also a bad matchup for Nautilus. Braum is also a lot tankier than Nautilus because he has his E shield, which just blocks incoming damage. And then second of all, Nautilus has no way to run away from Braum, whereas a lot of other champs can just either tank Braum out or just run away with a dash. If Braum just Qs Nautilus and just walks up to him and just starts like beating his ass, there's nothing really Nautilus can do in that situation. And if Nautilus engages on Braum, he's also going to get out traded because of Braum's shield. So that's why Braum isn't that good of a matchup for Nautilus as well. And then we have Alistar is also a decent matchup for Nautilus. It's not as bad as these three, but Alistar is kind of the same deal. As soon as you hook an Alistar, he's going to pulverize, and it's probably going to be like an even trade at best. And he's also a lot tankier than Nautilus in the team fights because his R gives him so much more tankiness. And then we have, these are more of the evener matchups. Blitzcrank is pretty even. Lulu, I would say, is also even, but Lulu can be pretty annoying to play against in general, just because she provides so much defensive utility to her ADC. Thresh is a pretty even matchup. Both have similar play styles, and they can't really do much to counter each other. Thresh can flay Nautilus away before he gets his auto attack off, but it's pretty hard to do in all honesty, and Nautilus has a lot less skill ceiling than Thresh. So if you start off playing Nautilus versus the guy start off playing Thresh, you're probably going to be doing well. So now we get to some favorable matchups for Nautilus. Basically, if you can see here, most of these champs are squishy enchanter supports or mage supports. And the reason why Nautilus does so well into these champions is that if he hooks one of them even once, or just gets an ult off, which is really easy, because it's point and click, it's really easy for your ADC to follow up and kill them, or for your jungler to gank them and they just die. So that's why Nautilus, I would always recommend picking Nautilus into any of these squishy enchanter supports. And finally, the last thing I'm going to say about Nautilus is that he's really good against Yuumi, for the sole reason that he has so much CC in his kit that it's really easy for him to CC Yuumi as she's getting off of someone, and then prevent her from getting back on. Because if you CC Yuumi, then she's unable to get back on to anyone for a set amount of time. It's like 6 seconds or something like that. It's a pretty long time. So Nautilus, as I said before, you could take the attack speed rune, and it really helps with rooting Yuumi as soon as possible after she gets off. And also, you can also R the Yuumi as she gets off, and if she attaches to someone as the projectile is traveling, they will get knocked up instead. So it doesn't actually do anything for Yuumi. She's just going to get her ADC knocked up instead of herself, which is equally as bad. So Nautilus, if you ever see a Yuumi picked early on the enemy team, pick Nautilus. I guarantee you it's a free win, especially if you take the attack speed rune. It's going to feel amazing how much you can destroy Yuumi. So that does it for this video. I hope it wasn't too long. I'm going to try to cut the video as much as possible in post so that it's as short as possible, but I really want to emphasize how important it is to learn the reasons why these are the optimal things, rather than just memorizing builds and combos and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, knowing why is what's going to make you a better player and able to apply this to other champions and other roles. So if you liked the video or you learned something from the guide, please consider subscribing and leaving a like down below. I'd really appreciate that. And also comment what champion you want me to do next, because I do plan on continuing these series if I can. And also feel free to leave any feedback for myself and this video. Anything that I could have done better, anything that I missed. If it was too lengthy, you want me to make it shorter, or it was actually too short, maybe. I doubt that's going to be the case, but yeah. To anyone who's still watching the video, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.